Hey there everyone, welcome to another video. This time it's going to be a movie review, and I know I haven't done that in quite some time, but I figured I'd go ahead and do one. Especially with what's happened recently, especially with the whole George Floyd situation, his death, the sentence of the cop, which I believe had a third-degree manslaughter charge on him. There's still riots and protests going on out there, especially in my home, in the capital of Austin. There's still a protest, going on in downtown Austin, actually. Unless if it's cleared up, but last I saw it, didn't see any signs of that slowing down. So it's been really crazy, especially what's been happening up in Minneapolis, and even in San Antonio there was some protesting going on, but there's been riots. It's just very chaotic, especially during this whole pandemic that we're still dealing with, and it's just unbelievably just crazy and chaotic like you wouldn't believe. But in order to hopefully bring some positivity and some easiness to my subs, I figured I'd go ahead and talk about a particular film that I found to be a very underrated gem that deals with, with the whole idea of prejudice, racism, and learning to come to acceptance of each other. And that's the 1985 dark science fiction drama film, Enemy Mine, which stars Dennis Quaid and Louis Gossett Jr. I'll talk a little bit about the crew and some additional cast members here. The film itself was directed by Wolfgang Petersen. He was just coming off of doing the Neverending Story, and before then he did a film called Gossett. Now, he wasn't in fact the original director. It was a different director by the name of Richard Loncraine, but apparently there was some production problems, poor dailies, etc. And so they were faced with the choice of whether they wanted to cut their losses or go with a new director, and they chose to go with Petersen. And as a result, he stepped in after he was able to wrap up his work on Neverending Story. And the producers you have are Stephen Friedman, Stanley O'Toole. The screenplay was done by Edward Khmara, and the film itself was based on the self-titled novel that was written by Barry B. Longyear. And of course, you get this. The film focuses on our main stars, which are Dennis Quaid and Louis Gossett Jr. as an alien and a humanoid race known as the Drag. And the other additional cast members, you have Brian James, who's known to play some pretty vile villains very well. You also have Carolyn McCormick, who I think did a lot of TV related work in her heyday, and this was like her first feature from what I've read. And some other notable cast members as Richard Marcus as Arnold Davidge's squad mate, and Barbara Robertson, who plays the child of Louis Gossett Jr. Zombies. And the film score was done by Maurice Jarre, and speaking of the score, I actually do have that, by the way, the deluxe edition, which I talked about briefly on my physical media collection that I got. And getting back to the film, the plot basically involves, it takes place in the 21st century, an interstellar war between, humans, which are associated as the Bilateral Terran Alliance, BTA for the acronym, and the Drags, the bipedal reptilian humanoids, that are being fought. And these battles are being fought, in the fighter spacecraft, the dog fights and stuff like that. And no human hates the Drags more than Melissa E. Davidge. During one battle, pretty much, where he engages in the Drag pilot, who is played by Louis Gossett Jr. His character's name is Joriba Shigan, who will later be nicknamed Jerry. They both end up crash landing on the Furring the Fourth. They eventually come to encounter each other, where they kind of viciously hunt one another. They're very tense and very hostile at first, but over the next 3 years, after saving each other's lives, they become friends and almost become brothers in a sense, which is very interesting, because they have curiosities about each other, where Davidge learns to put aside his prejudice in order to help him survive. He becomes very curious about the whole Drac language, and eventually Jerry becomes, so acclimated to learning English pretty well, because Davidge begins to teach him. But despite all that, Davidge hopes that maybe he can find some other evidence of humans. he does, go on a search for a while, but he comes to later find out that apparently there have been human miners known as scavengers who pretty much use drags as slave labor. He actually eventually returns to try to warn Jerry about this, but he discovers that in fact Jerry is now pregnant with a child. Apparently, Dracs also are a sexual race where they're hermaphroditic, and they have both male and female parts. So there's no female gender within that particular extraterrestrial race. And to eventually pass the time, Davidge and Jerry, memorize, their ancestry, especially, Jerry learns about, Davidge's parents. Eventually, he's able to give birth to zombies. This is what he names his child, but eventually he dies in childbirth. But before Jerry dies, he asks Davidge to pretty much, swear to raise the child, on his own. Hopefully they can guarantee, hopefully in the hopes that he can return to before the Holy Council on the Drac homeworld. Eventually, we also see a bit of a montage, seeing Zamus grow up. He actually grows up even a little faster than a normal human would. Eventually, one day, a ship flies overhead. Davidge goes out to investigate. He comes to find out that it's actually a scavenger ship. Davidge tries to keep, Zamus away from it. Try to concentrate on raising Zamus and making the best of this, inhospitable planet, which does have food, but it's a very kind of volatile type of planet. But eventually, Zamus, curious about what's up with that ship, he ends up getting captured by them. Davidge is shot and thought to be dead, but he's eventually rescued by the he eventually is rescued by his own people. He's able to be sewed back up. He eventually returns home and attempt to save Zamus from the scavengers. I'm sorry about that. I'm just trying to think about how I would sum this up. What I really like about this, and like I said before, this film touches on, the whole aspects of prejudice, racism, in a very intellectual way. We see how these characters the chemistry between Dennis Quaid and Louis Gossett Jr. is very effective. It shows that, there are some very huge differences in them, like their teachings. Like even Davidge kind of makes a joke about, he learned it from Mickey Mouse of all people. And then he basically, Jerry says he learns from the stuff from Shizma, which is the whole culture of the Drags, pretty much. And how they actually, sing about their ancestry in like sort of like in a, I wouldn't say like a psalm, but they kind of recite a particular way, which I think is interesting. And it's also interesting how their species also is asexual, because there's no female gender within that race. Yet they're able to reproduce. That's how they're able to reproduce. But with a particular baby can grow inside of them, so that's very interesting. And we also see how despite all the differences, they come to, the curiosity of Davidge wanting to learn the languages, and the whole drag culture, becomes very interesting to him, and he learns to put aside his racial and prejudice differences towards it. And the performances between the two are very genuine and very realistic. And the visual effects, from what you see, the whole dogfighting sequence, the spaceship sequence, the space station, which is pretty much the only home for the humans, it's skillfully done very well. It still holds up to the very day. And what's most impressive is the makeup effect of the drag. The whole lizard skin, the context. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's Louis Gossett Jr. in there. He's done films before this, like he did Jaws 3, and after this he did films like Iron Eagle and he was in The Principal, and then before he did this he did the film An Officer and Gentleman. He's able to really shine in his performances. Jariba, the fact that even though they're at war, they want it there. They have a very peaceful meaning to their race. They're not, as volatile as they are, and they're pretty intelligent, considering they're a completely different species. Like, he's able to pick up the English language pretty well because Davidge is actually teaching him. But that's where the strong point of the film is, where he's where they're basically interacting with each other, working together, despite there's differences between them. There is one bout where they do have a huge blow up because there's a meteor and he had to carry him, and they have a huge fight that blow up where they start attacking each other about their whole you can't do this, blah blah blah, that, or we're the best and stuff like that. So, but anyway you slice it, it's the whole relationship between Davidge and Jerry is it's realistically well done, very well. It has its heart in its right place. They come to have an acceptance and tolerance, especially when he becomes a parent to Zamis, and he becomes very protective of him. And there's even a scene where Zamis wishes he had 5 fingers instead of 3, and Davidge reminds him that no, you are a great kid, and stuff like that. He always tries to reassure him of that, and it's very touching. And like I said before, the visual effects, which were in fact done by ILM, they were done very well. And it doesn't matter what the budget was. Apparently the budget was pretty high because of the reshoots, which I'm going to get into. The director himself was the original director, Richard Loncraine. He was the original director. They started filming in 1984. When they started filming, like weeks in, there was some problems. There were poor dailies. The drag creature itself looked much different than what it was in this film currently. It looked like a 50s costume. So for whatever reason, they eventually redesigned it. And they were originally, I believe, filming in Budapest. Supposedly, I think they may have filmed in Iceland too. But there was production overruns, budget problems, and like I said before, they were either going to cut their losses or go with a new director, which they ended up doing. And Wolfgang Petersen came on board, and he wasn't sure if he was going to do this film, but after reading the script, it wasn't a shoot 'em up type of science fiction film like Star Wars. It was something a little more philosophical about dealing with prejudice, race, and the tolerance of both those races in the end. So he came on board, and he looked at all the work that Loncraine did, and he didn't use any of it. He started from scratch. The budget ballooned from somewhere which was going to be 17 million, ended up being 40 million, including marketing costs. So yeah, and then as back to the subject of the Dracula creature, it was done by Chris Wallace Incorporated. They did a lot of practical effects makeup. They did Gremlins before this. He would go on to do The Fly, and he did The Fly 2. So the practical work of the Drac itself holds up very well. It's probably a good thing they redesigned it, because I have no idea who the original designer was, but when Chris Wallace came on board, he did a fantastic job on it, and it's a shame you won't get anything like that now these days. Practical effects, still hold up. Same with the visuals and the matte paintings that you see, which I didn't even know were matte paintings, because a good part of this was actually shot in a studio in Munich, because he moved from that location and used Munich because Petersen used that for his film on Das Boot. He may have done that for the Neverending Story as well. So while I'm talking about the pros of this film, there is a con to this film. Looking back, I wish they would have shown maybe a little more of Davidge and Jerry's relationship, unfolding, because it was done kind of like in a montage type of way. I just wish they would have shown a little bit more. And looking back, while the finale had maybe sort of an action feel to it, because apparently the part of the word mine, they wanted to have a little action sequence where Davidge goes back to find Zamis and rescue him, and he engages in the battle with the Brian James character, Stubbs. I feel like it was kind of weakly done, and then the ending I wouldn't say is bad, but I wish they would have showed more of the home world, and you kind of want you yearn to want more from it. I think that's the problem I have with it. But other than that, it's a fantastically well done film. The whole relationship between Davidge and Jerry is really the strong point, and the fact that he is raising his kid alone on a very hostile type of planet, and the visuals and the practical effects, they still hold up today in every single facet. And it has its heart in its right place, because it does so in a very intellectual type of manner. It shows that racism can occur in a different completely species, and when you shouldn't judge it based on what you've supposedly heard from them. Once you can become once you encounter them face to face and you get to know them, you begin to learn to put aside your prejudice and racial differences, and learn that that person is truly something unique and special in your life. Whether it's a friend or a lover, you come to accept them. And that's what I like about this film. And what's sad about this, unfortunately, when Fox attempted to advertise this movie, it apparently was a very hard movie to advertise. They didn't know how to advertise it. And as a result, unfortunately, it bombed. The budget was nearly around $40 million, and the film only made $12 million domestically. But when it came out in VHS, it became a very cult hit, and it definitely found its audience, and I'm very glad it did. It definitely found me, because I had no idea that this film existed until I watched it on TV, I think back in '95. So, and I've been always curious, and I'm glad to have this film. It's very well acted. There's very confident direction in Petersen. Very confident direction by Petersen. Visuals are still hold up today, because with ILM you're getting whether you have if you have a small, medium, or large budget, you're going to get the best visual effects work from ILM. And Chris Walas, with his practical FX design of the drag creature, still holds up to this day. And it's a sadly missed art that I wish would be brought back these days, instead of just CGI and everything. I really miss it. And then the score by Maurice Jarre, which I have here, it's a very good listen. There's some really great themes, like Before the Holy Council is the one standout, the main theme. In the main title, where you see the opening sequence of space, and the kind of the future is kind of dark, as I'm guessing Earth was. It doesn't really say, but something happened with the planet Earth, and their only home is pretty much a space station in space. But yeah, there's a good amount of cues on here that I like, that by Maurice Jarre. He did other films afterwards, like he did Fatal Attraction. He did another film right after this called The Mosquito Coast with Harrison Ford. He actually did a film that also starred Ford called Witness. And he did a really fantastic job on the Jacob's Ladder score, and I'm very glad to have the score. There was a few cues which I wish could have been better, but overall, Maurice Jarre does a very commendable. I take it back. He does a fantastic job on the score, which almost sounds like a John Williams type of score, for what he had. But anywho, I think this is going to do it for me. If you haven't seen it, give it a watch. It's definitely well worth it. I wish there would be a special edition, where we can have some interviews with Louis Gossett Jr. and Dennis Quaid, and maybe we can see some of the original daily work of Richard Loncraine's version of Enemy Mine. But anyway you slice it, it's a very worthy film. Definitely worth getting, and definitely worth renting, if you haven't seen it. So give it a watch. Just make sure you don't pay too much for the Twilight Blu-ray, because it's just ridiculously priced. But anyway you slice it, Enemy Mine, very fantastic, underrated gem of a film that deals with the whole controversial, sensitive subjects of racism, prejudice, and the tolerance of two individuals. So, anywho, that's going to do it for me. Hopefully, you like this review, and if you like it, feel free to comment, like, share, and all that jazz, and let me know what you think in the comments. So, alrighty, I'll be seeing you later. Bye-bye.